From the moment I moved into my quiet suburban neighborhood, everything seemed picturesque. Manicured lawns stretched in perfect symmetry, white picket fences lined every street, and the houses gleamed under the golden afternoon sun. It was the kind of neighborhood people dream of, a place where rules were respected, gardens were pristine, and peace seemed to flow from house to house. But behind that veneer of perfection, a darker story was quietly unfolding, one that would change my life and the lives of everyone around me. It started subtly. Small inconveniences that I could almost laugh off at first. Notices from the homeowners association demanding I trim a bush here, paint a fence there, or even correct the shade of my mailbox. I thought it was petty, but not unusual. HOAs have reputations for their micromanagement. I paid the fines, made the corrections, and tried to move on. Yet, something about the timing of these notices didn't sit right. They always seemed to appear shortly after I raised a question about neighborhood policies or pointed out discrepancies in the HOA's records. Then, one morning, while walking my dog along the far end of my property line, I noticed something odd. Behind a dense row of trees, partially hidden by the shadow of the towering oaks, there appeared to be construction. At first, I assumed it was one of my neighbors building a shed or adding a patio, but the scale didn't match. Peering closer, my stomach dropped. There, on what I knew unequivocally was my land, a massive, multi-story structure was taking shape. Its design was luxurious, extravagant even, with expansive windows and ornate stonework. I could not comprehend it. I had never granted anyone permission for construction on my property. As the days passed, the structure grew, and my initial disbelief transformed into anger. I reached out to the HOA board, hoping to clarify ownership and halt the construction legally. Their responses were vague, dismissive, and strangely evasive. Some members claimed ignorance, others suggested it was a friendly agreement, yet no one produced any paperwork. The deeper I dug, the more convoluted the story became. Using public records, I traced the property deeds and permits. What I uncovered left me stunned. The HOA president, the very person charged with maintaining the community's integrity, had quietly acquired a permit to build a mansion on my land, without my knowledge, without my consent, and without a single legal basis. They had falsified documents, manipulated boundaries, and exploited the bureaucracy to lay claim to my property. The audacity was staggering. This was no minor infraction, it was outright theft, disguised under the authority of the neighborhood's most powerful figure. I began documenting everything: photographs of the construction, copies of the altered records, and a meticulous log of every interaction I had with the HOA. It became clear that this wasn't just about me. The president's mansion, hidden in plain sight, symbolized the corruption that could fester under the guise of community rules. I realized then that my fight was no longer just for my land, it was for justice, for transparency, and for anyone else who might be vulnerable to such abuse. Determined to reclaim what was mine, I enlisted the help of a real estate attorney, someone who had experience untangling fraudulent claims. We pored over decades of land records, zoning laws, and HOA agreements. Each discovery added fuel to the fire of my resolve. It was infuriating to realize how a system designed to protect homeowners could be weaponized against them, but it also gave me leverage. Once the trail of illegitimacy was laid bare, there would be no hiding the truth. The next challenge was confronting the HOA president directly. Though I had no interest in dialogue for reconciliation, I needed to ensure that every threat, every intimidation tactic they might employ, was documented. The tension escalated rapidly. Notices of violation were suddenly more aggressive, attempts to negotiate construction delays fell flat, and subtle threats began to appear: legal notices, insinuations about personal conduct, even attempts to sway neighbors against me. I refused to be intimidated. Every step was carefully documented, a chess game where each move had to be calculated and anticipated. By the end of the month, the mansion was nearly complete. Standing at the edge of my property, I could see the sprawling estate, luxurious yet grotesque on land that was rightfully mine. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Every window, every balcony, every ornamental detail was a statement of dominance and arrogance. Yet, to me, it was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown, daring me to reclaim what was mine. And reclaim it I would. In the nights that followed, I began formulating my plan. If the president believed that money, influence, and fear could secure their claim, they had gravely underestimated my determination. I knew the legal battle would be intense, but I also recognized that law alone was only part of the solution. There were ways to leverage the system, to expose their deceit, and to turn the tables. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but justice has a way of finding cracks in even the most fortified structures. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. I documented every detail, built my legal case, and quietly observed the mansion, preparing for the day when my rightful claim would be enforced. The stakes were enormous, not just for me, but for the neighborhood, for the integrity of property ownership, and for anyone who dared to be deceived by those in positions of power. I knew this confrontation would define the rest of my life, but I was ready. And so, as the first chapter of this battle drew to a close, the mansion stood as a monument to corruption, and I stood as a quiet storm, ready to reclaim my land, expose the deceit, and turn the tables in a way that no one would see coming. The fight was just beginning, and the world was about to witness a homeowner's wrath unlike anything this quiet suburban neighborhood had ever imagined. The days following the discovery of the mansion were a whirlwind of strategy, research, and meticulous planning. The sheer audacity of the HOA president to build a lavish home on my property had ignited a fire that no intimidation, threat, or veiled warning could extinguish. This was no longer about fences, mailboxes, or trivial fines, it was about ownership, justice, and reclaiming what was legally and morally mine. I started by analyzing every legal document related to the property. Deeds, plats, zoning records, HOA bylaws, permits, and tax filings were all scrutinized line by line. Each page revealed inconsistencies, errors, and deliberate manipulations designed to disguise the president's illegal occupation of my land. It became clear that this was not an impulsive act of greed, it was a carefully orchestrated plan, executed over months, perhaps even years. But their meticulousness had left a trail, and my attorney and I were determined to follow it to its conclusion. Simultaneously, I began documenting the mansion itself. Photographs, videos, and drone footage captured its scale and detail. Every window, entrance, and structural feature was recorded. This evidence would prove essential not just in establishing ownership, but also in showing the audacity of the intrusion. The mansion, which appeared so imposing from the outside, now served as a testament to both the president's hubris and the opportunity for exposure. The HOA, sensing resistance, escalated their tactics. Notices became more frequent, fines more severe, and accusations more extreme. They tried to paint me as unreasonable, even dangerous, to the neighbors who had previously been friendly. Flyers circulated, subtle warnings were whispered during community meetings, and some neighbors began treating me with suspicion. It was clear that they were counting on social pressure and fear to break me. But I remained undeterred, carefully documenting every interaction. I understood that every attempt to intimidate me would strengthen my case, not weaken it. The legal battle began in earnest. My attorney filed a motion to halt construction and to assert my claim over the property. The court papers were detailed, referencing every falsified document and every irregularity in the HOA's actions. We argued that the mansion was not just improperly built, it was illegally sited, violating multiple codes and property boundaries. The HOA president's attempt to claim ownership of my land was clearly a fraudulent act, and we had the evidence to prove it. As the case progressed, I learned more about the president's history. Long before this mansion, there had been whispers of other questionable actions, mismanaged funds, intimidation of homeowners, and secret deals with contractors. It became evident that the mansion was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a pattern of deceit and abuse. The community's blind trust in the HOA had allowed one individual to exploit the system unchecked. This realization fueled my resolve even further. In the background, I began quietly communicating with neighbors who had been impacted by the HOA's aggressive behavior. Stories emerged of fines for absurd reasons: incorrectly colored flower pots, unauthorized garden statues, illegal fence heights. Many had complied out of fear, never realizing that the president's authority was being wielded to manipulate and control. Together, these accounts formed a powerful narrative of systemic abuse. The mansion was only the most egregious example, but it became the symbol of a much larger problem. Meanwhile, construction on the mansion continued, though now under intense scrutiny. Our legal motions demanded inspections, and several city officials visited the property to verify permits and compliance. Each inspection uncovered more violations: improper zoning, incorrect permits, structural inconsistencies. The president's perfect facade began to crack. Behind the polished walls and manicured gardens lay a web of illegal activity waiting to be unraveled. During this period, I also prepared a plan beyond the legal fight. If successful, reclaiming the deed would not just mean evicting the HOA president, it would allow me to transform the mansion into something meaningful. I imagined a place that served the community, a shelter for those in need, a symbol of justice reclaimed from greed. The vision kept me motivated during long nights of paperwork, research, and strategic planning. Every setback was met with renewed determination, and every small victory fueled my momentum. The courtroom battle became intense. The HOA president, confident in their control, underestimated my resolve and the depth of the evidence I had amassed. Witnesses were called, experts consulted, and documents examined with a fine-tooth comb. The truth, carefully documented and methodically presented, began to surface. It was no longer just my word against theirs, it was a mountain of evidence exposing a fraudulent claim. Then came the turning point. During a routine deposition, a critical piece of evidence emerged. A contractor who had worked on the mansion admitted that the HOA president had instructed them to falsify boundaries and manipulate permits. This revelation was explosive. It confirmed the fraudulent intent, leaving the president vulnerable to not only losing the mansion but also facing potential legal consequences for fraud. The court's perception shifted, and suddenly, the balance of power began tilting in my favor. As the chapter drew to a close, the mansion that had once symbolized audacity and corruption now represented a potential victory. The legal battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. What had seemed impossible, the reclaiming of my land, was now within reach. The anticipation of taking back control, evicting the intruder, and transforming the mansion into a force for good filled me with both exhilaration and cautious optimism. Standing at the edge of my property, watching the mansion in the late afternoon light, I realized that this fight was about far more than real estate. It was about accountability, courage, and reclaiming power from those who abuse it. And soon, the HOA president would learn a lesson in humility that they would never forget. The courtroom doors opened to the final chapter of this long, exhausting, yet utterly satisfying battle. For months, the fight had been legal, strategic, and painstakingly methodical. Every document scrutinized, every witness questioned, every misstep by the HOA president meticulously logged. Now, the moment of reckoning had arrived. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of arrogance and deception was about to become a testament to justice. The court carefully examined the evidence we had compiled, the falsified permits, the manipulated boundary records, the contractor's testimony. Every argument the HOA president had made was systematically dismantled. The fraud, the audacity, and the sheer illegality of the construction on my property could no longer be denied. It became clear to everyone involved, the mansion was mine, by right and by law. The sense of vindication that washed over me was profound. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a triumph for every homeowner who had ever been bullied or misled by those entrusted with authority. When the judge's ruling finally came, it was decisive. The deed was restored to me in full, and the HOA president was ordered to vacate the property immediately. The relief was overwhelming. Years of tension, intimidation, and disbelief culminated in this singular, defining moment. As I walked up to the mansion, feeling the texture of the gates, the smooth stone steps, and the expansive facade, it struck me, what had been stolen from me was now back in my hands, but it was only the beginning of the real transformation. The eviction was swift. The HOA president, once so smug and untouchable, packed belongings in haste, their arrogance replaced by defeat and humiliation. The neighbors, some still wary from months of propaganda, now saw the truth. The mansion had been a monument to deception, but its reclamation became a public demonstration that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law when clear evidence exists. Watching them leave, I felt a sense of justice not merely served, but amplified. Once the mansion was fully under my control, the vision I had cultivated during the legal battle began to take shape. The house, so long a symbol of greed, would now serve a purpose far greater than luxury or status. I began planning its transformation into a community shelter, a safe haven for those without homes, and a center for local support initiatives. The rooms that had been intended for opulence would now house warmth, safety, and opportunity. The hallways that had echoed with the footsteps of deceit would now resonate with laughter, hope, and purpose. The renovation process was extensive. Some parts of the mansion were structurally sound but required modernization to meet safety and accessibility standards. Volunteers from the community joined hands, bringing skills, labor, and energy. Local businesses contributed materials, furniture, and resources. What had once been a private stronghold of deception was now becoming a collaborative project of healing and rebuilding. Every nail, every coat of paint, and every repaired window symbolized a reclamation not just of property, but of community spirit. The transformation was also emotional. Standing in the grand living room, envisioning it as a dining hall for families in need, I reflected on how the mansion had represented the worst of human greed and manipulation. Yet, here it was becoming a beacon of hope and resilience. The irony was not lost on me, a house built to flaunt power and ownership now embodied generosity and humiliation. The neighbors, some still wary from months of propaganda, now saw the truth. The mansion had been a monument to deception, but its reclamation became a public demonstration that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law when clear evidence exists. Watching them leave, I felt a sense of justice not merely served, but amplified. Once the mansion was fully under my control, the vision I had cultivated during the legal battle began to take shape. The house, so long a symbol of greed, would now serve a purpose far greater than luxury or status. I began planning its transformation into a community shelter, a safe haven for those without homes, and a center for local support initiatives. The rooms that had been intended for opulence would now house warmth, safety, and opportunity. The hallways that had echoed with the footsteps of deceit would now resonate with laughter, hope, and purpose. The renovation process was extensive. Some parts of the mansion were structurally sound but required modernization to meet safety and accessibility standards. Volunteers from the community joined hands, bringing skills, labor, and energy. Local businesses contributed materials, furniture, and resources. What had once been a private stronghold of deception was now becoming a collaborative project of healing and rebuilding. Every nail, every coat of paint, and every repaired window symbolized a reclamation not just of property, but of community spirit. The transformation was also emotional. Standing in the grand living room, envisioning it as a dining hall for families in need, I reflected on how the mansion had represented the worst of human greed and manipulation. Yet, here it was becoming a beacon of hope and resilience. The irony was not lost on me, a house built to flaunt power and ownership now embodied generosity and service. Every corner held a story, every wall echoed the shift from self-interest to communal good. During the opening day of the shelter, the mansion buzzed with life. Volunteers, beneficiaries, and supporters moved through the halls, arranging spaces, preparing meals, and sharing stories. Children ran along corridors that had once been symbols of arrogance, their laughter transforming the atmosphere. The mansion had finally shed the weight of its dark past and embraced a new identity, a living testament to the power of justice, determination, and the idea that even the most corrupted structures can be repurposed for good. The HOA president, watching from afar, could only observe as the mansion's purpose was rewritten. Their attempts to assert control, intimidate, and manipulate had ultimately failed. In reclaiming my land, I had not just regained what was mine, I had turned it into something meaningful, something that could benefit countless others. It was a reminder that greed is temporary, but resilience and purpose endure. Community support grew steadily. Neighbors who had once been silent now participated actively. Local media coverage highlighted the story, praising the transformation from a tale of corruption into one of hope. The mansion, visible from the surrounding streets, became a symbol, not of power abused, but of power reclaimed and responsibly applied. It inspired conversations, encouraged transparency in local governance, and reminded everyone that vigilance and courage can topple even the most audacious attempts at wrongdoing. Months later, as I walked through the fully functional shelter, I reflected on the journey. The initial shock, the investigation, the legal battles, and the eventual reclamation had been grueling, but every obstacle had been necessary to reach this point. What had started as a fight to reclaim my land had evolved into a mission far greater than myself. Lives were being changed, hope restored, and a community strengthened. The mansion, once a symbol of corruption, now embodied transformation, accountability, and service. The story did not end with the eviction of corrupt HOA president. It continued with the impact of the shelter, the empowerment of the community, and the lesson that vigilance, courage, and meticulous documentation could overturn even the most brazen attempts at theft. The mansion, standing proud and repurposed, reminded everyone that injustice can be confronted, power can be challenged, and good can emerge from even the darkest circumstances. And so, as the sun set over the neighborhood that had once been a battleground, the mansion glowed warmly. It was no longer a symbol of greed, it was a home, a haven, and a story of triumph. Justice had been served, the community strengthened, and a once hidden secret was now a legacy of hope.